Hey, I'm Jake, and today's topic on the steaming pile has me more excited than Link in a pottery barn. And let me tell you why, because today we're talking about wrestling! Pro wrestling! Oh yeah, and this is Mr. Sacco. Borrowed him from Mick Foley, bought him from Mick Foley, and he's here to help today. But before we get started, let's talk about some terminology. Wrestling pre-2000s was a vastly different animal. People didn't realize that the fix was in. They thought it was a completely legitimate sport.
Is this a good business?
Yeah, it's a good business. I wouldn't be in it if it wasn't.
Why is it a good business?
Because only the tough survive. That's the reason you ain't in it. And this punk holding the camera reading he ain't in it. Reading these rednecks out here ain't in it. Because it's a tough business.
That's terrific.
What, is that all you got?
I'll ask you the standard question. You know,
Standard question.
I think this is fake.
You think it's fake? What's that? Is that fake? Huh? What the hell's wrong with you? That's open hand slap, huh? You think it's fake? You come. Huh?
I know, a little weird, right? Especially if you were born post-1995. I was born in '87, so I don't have that handicap. Now anyway, we need to understand what heels and faces are, or more specifically, baby faces and heels. Baby faces were good guy wrestlers. Heels are bad guy wrestlers. Now heels back in these days, because the crowd thought this was legitimate, most of the crowd at least, they had to live in fear of being attacked during matches, after matches, having their tires slashed, having their windows shot out, and several other potentially life-threatening issues. Now with that being said, let's start with Muhammad Ali. But Jake, isn't he a boxing guy? Yeah, but I'm about to explain. Shut up, Sacco. Now we all know who Muhammad Ali is. The catchphrase spewing, money printing punch machine. He's widely regarded as the greatest boxer of all time. Hell, he'll tell you himself, I'm the greatest, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, I'm still pretty. You know, the catchphrases go on and on and on. But did you know he actually stole his shtick from Gorgeous George, one of the early heels of professional wrestling? Don't believe me? Just listen to the man himself.
Gorgeous George, a famous American wrestler, he was talking about, I am the prettiest wrestler. I am great. Look at my beautiful blonde hair. And I said, this is a good idea. And right away I started talking, I am the greatest.
Next we have Andre the Giant. Born in a small town in France, billed at 7'2", 540 pounds, Andre was literally one of the largest men the sport has ever seen. Andre is an iconic, legendary figure, arguably the first international professional wrestling megastar. He wrestled all over the globe. Anywhere there was professional wrestling, you can bet Andre the Giant was booked. Now, Andre, back in the territory system, wrestled for the WWF, the WWF after the name change, the AWA, the NWA, I believe NJPW, and probably even All Japan Professional Wrestling. But that's not why we're here. He spawned several, thank you Sacco, books, documentaries, and he's been on a ton of merchandise. But we're here to focus on his TV and movie appearances, most notably his stint as the Sasquatch in an episode of The $6 Million Man, and the highly quotable Princess Bride, a movie that is beloved by generations to this day, past and present. Moving on to Ric Flair. Woo! Calm down. Or more specifically, Ric Flair's trash talk. Ric Flair's trash talk was so legendary and self-indulgent that to this day it has effects. His trademark woo can be heard in arenas across the globe to this day. And his whole gimmick of the womanizing, self-indulgent, arrogant, pretty boy athlete has been adapted by professional wrestlers, singer-songwriters, and celebrities of all walks of life to this day. He's been the influence for several rap songs, most recently the Ric Flair Drip, and in the music video he even appears. If you're still not sold on the influence that Ric Flair has had, check out this clip of a professional football team in their locker room getting pumped and reciting one of his iconic promos word for word.
Rolex wearing. Woo! The Rolex wearing. Diamond ring wearing. Woo! Diamond ring wearing. Kiss stealing. Woo! Kiss stealing. Woo! Wheeling dealing. Woo! Wheeling dealing. Limousine ride. Woo! Limousine ride. Jet flying. Woo! Son of a gun. Woo! Jet flying. Son of a gun. And I'm having a hard time holding these alligators down. And I'm hard time holding these alligators down. Woo! They give me 2 claps and a Ric Flair.
Next up, we have the Andy Kaufman, Jerry the King Lawler feud. We're going to have to set the table here a little bit because there's a lot to unpack here. A lot's been written about and said about this feud, and you can look that stuff up for yourself. I'm just going to cover the basics here. Now, Jerry the King Lawler, many of you may remember as Jim Ross's commentary partner on Monday Night Raw throughout the Attitude Era. But Jerry the King Lawler was a wrestling superstar in his own right in the Memphis territory, which he was part owner of. He was constantly the champion, arguably the biggest star that Memphis had at the time. Many of you may remember Jerry the King Lawler as Jim Ross's partner, you know, the guy who was constantly screaming, "Puppies!" But there was more to the King than just that. King actually started as a pro wrestler in the 70s and wrestled in the Memphis territory, which he was part owner of, all the way up until it closed its doors sometime in the 90s, and he jumped permanently to WWF and transitioned into commentary. Now, Andy Kaufman, a comedian/actor who was known for his appearances as the Lotka character in Taxi, his outlandish performances and pranky social experiments, was a huge fan of professional wrestling. He had adapted into his stage show the shtick where he would wrestle women. After doing this for several months or over a certain period of time, he dubbed himself the Intergender Champion of the World. Kaufman would later go on to the WWF, which was ran at the time by Vince McMahon's father, Vince McMahon Sr. He would pitch the idea to Vince Sr. of putting his intergender shtick on TV or on the road with WWF. Now, Vince McMahon Sr. thought that associating wrestling with a celebrity would allow the crowd to realize that the fix was in. And he didn't want to do that, or quote-unquote, expose the business! Thanks, Sacco. So he politely declined Kaufman's offer. Now, Kaufman, still wanting to get involved in wrestling, and wrestling on the national stage having been broken down into territories, eventually would hook up with Jerry the King Lawler. Lawler instantly saw the potential of this angle and knew it would make them a lot of money. So Andy Kaufman begins to wrestle women on Memphis television, cutting several hilarious, now at the time considered sexist promos, maybe even back then. And eventually, this led Lawler to get involved in one of these matches to kick off their feud. Now, this feud would eventually lead the two to wrestle in a match in which Jerry Lawler would take Andy Kaufman and spike his head with two of the most vicious pile drivers I've ever seen. On top of this, the pile driver at the time was considered illegal to sell how dangerous the move was, and Lawler was disqualified.
Only the second move by Lawler, and bang goes Kaufman. It's going to be a disqualification. Danny Davis, his manager, not believing it.
And so it was short and sweet. A little bit of improv. I went ahead and gave him a second pile driver. Now the match is over. Everybody's on their feet. Everybody's happy. It's time to go home. And Andy's still laying there like he's dead.
Kaufman, wanting to sell the legitimacy of the quote-unquote legitimacy of the injury, was carted out on an ambulance. Kaufman, despite not being injured, stayed in the hospital for several days to make the crowds think that his neck was actually hurt. Kaufman also wore a neck brace for months despite not needing it. And again, this helped to make the audience believe that he and Jerry Lawler were actually fighting. Now let's cut to what we're really wanting to talk about here. The infamous David Letterman appearance by Jerry the King Lawler and Andy Kaufman. It had been proposed to Kaufman that he bring Lawler on the program and that they were going to squash this feud. I believe there was going to be apologies exchanged and they were going to sing Kumbaya or something. Something ridiculous like that. Now, Lawler and Andy did not want to do this completely because they wanted to keep working together. Andy was having fun, Lawler was having fun, and believe me, Lawler loved cashing the checks. So they made the Letterman appearance, but it didn't go as planned. Due to some quick thinking and improvisation on both Lawler and Kaufman's part, that led to this moment, which is considered one of the most infamous segments on television to this day.
My father said, my manager said, they all said that I had a right, I could have gotten a lawyer and I could have sued you for what you did, and I didn't, and all I want is an apology. Even you asked me last time I was on your show if I was going to have a lawsuit, and I could have sued you. I could have sued you for everything you're worth.
Well,
and I didn't, because I'm not that kind of a guy.
Yeah. You know what?
What kind of a guy are you?
You're not the kind of guy you are.
I'll just be over here. We're going to pause here for station identification and get the hoses out here.
You can't say no.
is Andy, are you coming in here again, or?
I am sick of this bullshit. You are full of bullshit, my friend. I will sue you for everything you have. I will sue your ass. You're a motherfucking asshole. As far as I'm concerned, you hear me? A fucking asshole. Fuck you. I will get you for this. I am sorry to use those words on television. I apologize to all my fans. I'm sorry. But you're a fucking asshole. A fucking asshole. You hear me? A fucking asshole.
All right, now let's talk about the 1988 classic, John Carpenter's They Live, starring Rowdy Roddy Piper of pro wrestling fame and Keith David of a ton of cinematic fame, but who many of you may know as Goliath from the Gargoyles cartoon. Now, this movie's famous for several reasons. It spawned, in my opinion, and many other people's opinion, it spawned one of the best one-liners in movie history. And the worst being, life's a bitch, brother, and she's back in heat. Thanks, Sacco. Now, the movie's also noted for its hilarious fight scene about an hour in, 6 minutes and 12 seconds, over a pair of sunglasses. Now, granted, the sunglasses revolve around the whole plot. It was one of the longest in cinematic history, if not the longest at the time, and has even spawned a parody from the South Park creators in the Timmy versus Jimmy fight. Now, it'd be hard to have a video on this type of subject without mentioning Hulk Hogan, or Hulkamania. There were many Hulkamaniacs. If you were alive during the mid-80s all the way up to the mid-90s, you were probably a Hulkamaniac. I know this guy was. Hulk Hogan made many movie appearances, many TV appearances. His likeness is on countless pieces of merchandise, from toys, lunchboxes, shirts, advertisements, and so on and so forth. So let's briefly bring up some of his movie appearances. Three Ninjas, High Noon at Mega Mountain, Santa with Muscles, Mr. Nanny, one of my personal favorites, Suburban Commando. Hey, isn't that where he, shoots the stoplight out? Yeah, I know, that part's awesome, man. I fucking love that. Anyway, I digress. There was also his TV show, or made-for-TV movie, I can't really remember, Thunder in Paradise. I think it was about beach justice or something. But speaking of beach justice, he had a ridiculous appearance in Baywatch, in which he played himself, and Ric Flair, playing an evil developer, also himself, Ric Flair, bought the rights to the gym and planned to bulldoze it over. For what? I don't know.
Ric Flair. So you're the developer. I thought you'd be in a pond hiding under the scum where you'd feel at home.
Oh, Hogan, it's wonderful as always to see you again. Hey, Macho Man, last time I saw your face, man, it was under my shoe. What are you doing with your time now that you're a washed-up ex-wrestler, Flair?
You know what they say, brother. Those who can do. Those who can't don't.
Well, if that's the case, you'll appreciate this. For starters, man, I bought the property. You got it? In a week, it'll all be mine. But today, I'm here because I'm closing the gym down, big boy.
You can't do that.
Oh, little lady, that's where you're wrong. I'm the nature boy. I've got the documents. Soon, this'll all be condos. It'll all be mine. Woo!
And this culminates with Hulk Hogan having to wrestle Vader for the rights to the gym. Now, I found this episode extremely sexually confusing as a prepubescent boy, because what am I supposed to jerk off to? Pamela Anderson's tits or Hulk Hogan's bulging biceps? Oh, that's a trick question, Jake. You get off on the Hoff. True enough, Sacco. But these are only a smattering of Hulk Hogan's TV and movie appearances. The sheer amount of things that Hulk Hogan was involved in are just ridiculous. He still appears in video games. He's still talked about. Yes, there's some controversy about him now, but I like to have a little bit of self-imposed cognitive dissonance. I'm not really a Terry Bollea guy, but I love Hulk Hogan. Moving on. Hey, do you remember Married with Children? Why am I in here? Shut up, Sacco. It's part of the gag. Now, What you may not know about Married with Children, it was a sitcom in the late 80s, ran up through the 90s, and it starred Ed O'Neill as Al Bundy. Well, the Bundy clan was actually named after professional wrestler King Kong Bundy. And the original neighbors, Steve and Marcy Rhodes, yeah, we all know Jefferson Darcy was better, but this is about wrestling. The Rhodes were named after the American dream doth erode, baby. That's pretty good, Sacco. Now, on top of this, Married with Children also had some other wrestling connections. King Kong Bundy, the namesake for the show, appeared in at least 2 episodes, and the Glow Girls, or Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling, who you may know from the Netflix show based on them, also made an appearance in an episode. Next, we're going to talk about 90s commercials. And if you were alive in the 90s and sentient, as in not a toddler and can remember them, you may know that 90s commercials were effing ridiculous. You had Capri Sun commercials turning you into the Liquid Terminator, ridiculous soda commercials, Surge for some reason causing riots, toy commercials that would make you think that every child was a monstrous madman. It was just a super ridiculous time of consumerism and overly sugary products. But in that, somehow Macho Man's, and that's what we're talking about, somehow Macho Man Slim Jim commercials were a cut above. They stand out. You can probably think of your favorite one to this day.
And action.
Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo?
Again, please.
Again?
Again.
Art thou bored?
Yeah.
Step into a Slim Jim. Turn to the spice. That baby juicy taste. Need a little excitement? Step into a Slim Jim.
And Macho Man's probably the reason many of us snapped into this dubious meat stick. Oh, do you got something for me there, Sacco? Oh, hell yeah. Oh, yeah! Now, I want some of that. Yeah, that's pretty good, man. Yeah. You like that? Oh. Now, tragic fact, Macho Man actually died in May of 2011. They say it was a heart attack. I assume it was actually an awesome attack because his mortal coil could no longer hold the awesomeness that was Macho Man. And on top of that, a perfect human being is not supposed to exist. Oh, ironically enough, the day before his death, a holy man had predicted that the rapture was coming. And this spawned the meme of Macho Man dropping the elbow on Christ, which is great. But I like to think that actually happened. Macho Man died for our sins to save us from Jesus or God, dethroned him, and now sits on the throne of eternity as a benevolent, elbow-dropping God. I also like to think that Macho Man hunts the majestic Slim Juffalo that travels the cosmos, and every time you hear the crack of thunder, that's actually Macho Man dropping an elbow on one of these creatures in an explosion of Slim Jims, and that's how we actually get them. But that's just my religion. Anyway, now we come to the main event. That's right, late 90s Attitude Era wrestling. You may remember WWF, ECW, and WCW, the big two being WWF and WCW. This was so inescapable, the wrestlers didn't have to step outside of wrestling to affect mainstream pop culture, though they did with stars like The Rock and Stone Cold moving on to Hollywood fame later, but let's just list off a couple of names from this era. Whether they started there or not, it doesn't matter. Do you remember The Undertaker, Stone Cold, Mick Foley, Triple H, Goldberg, Diamond Dallas Page, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Raven, and many more? Let's not forget the two biggest wrestling factions of the time, D-Generation X and the NWO. Yes, there are countless others that I could list. I'm looking at you, Nation of Domination. But we're going to focus on the main two. Now, this started literal schoolyard arguments. You know, who's better, Stone Cold or Goldberg? Obviously Stone Cold, unless you're a lame ass. You know, like, oh, NWO for life, or DX, suck it. And who didn't get sent home for crotch chopping? Wrestling shirts populated and dotted the landscape. Everybody had one. You were wearing your favorite guy or your favorite people day in and day out. You know, maybe you even had a really sweet Stone Cold shirt with a skull, with a realistic skull and a rattlesnake on the back that your overly religious mom made your dad black out with some clothing paint because she thought 316 was sacrilegious, even though you're a 10-year-old boy and you don't know what sacrilegious means, but I digress. Now, I just can't stress how big wrestling was. Like, literal fist fights would happen in school based on who you liked in wrestling. And if you look at wrestling now, that's insane. That's sort of ridiculous. Kind of. You know, I stand by punching those kids. Now, my personal favorite of the era was Mick Foley, or Mankind, Cactus Jack, Dude Love. He's responsible for some of the most iconic and brutal moments, in my opinion. Now, granted, Stone Cold was the star of the era, but that's neither here nor there. I guess that wraps it up for today. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. I'm Jake, this is Socko, and this was The Steaming Pile. Well, that didn't fucking work.